Hello, microphone check 1 2. Um, how's it going? Haven't seen you in a few days.
I'm good. I'm more or less as hot and as I was the last time.
Yeah, I am like feeling the heat.
Well, I was
Uh,
looking at the prompts, and maybe we could lead into some of the things we didn't get around to last time.
I actually read the last question I liked, and I wanted to ask you about that. It was something about like how political
Yeah,
becomes personal. Like I forgot the exact wording, but I remember when I read through them, I was like, oh, that will be an interesting question to.
yeah. Let's go there. So the question is, do you feel the impetus to address or incorporate political issues in your work, especially in today's social climate?
It's a good question. Do you gonna want to go first?
Okay, so I'm interested in the world as it is today. Um, I tend to like works that where the artist has some skin in the game, and I think that can kind of lead you to a political engagement. I also believe really strongly that at the end of the day, you do have to be a storyteller first and
Mhm.
foremost. That's the job is to create the artwork and to make some kind of compact with the audience that you're going to express something that at its best outlasts its moment, that kind of cuts to something deeper and engages us on the emotional level. But I happen to think that, politics, to use a very general word, is an amazing way to cut to emotion. And, the film that I did could kind of be classified maybe in a genre of what might be called kind of social realism. And I did a lot of research. My challenge was at a certain point I had to stop researching because it was almost too much, and the reality was almost too too stark in a way, perhaps too. You don't want to make a pamphlet. You don't want to make
Right. You
again.
can't also always hit all the notes, or you can always hit like all the different facets. I don't know how you feel, but sometimes I'm like, I'd rather kind of dive deep and just tell like a story of like that sort of is a very deep sliver of the truth than just kind of skimming on the surface and trying to like give you this 360 feeling of some place or somebody.
No, I agree completely, and that was in almost every way. We tried not to do a 360.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Uh, if you kind of hone a perspective on a literal level, just like my main character is in every single scene. You see everything through his eyes. I think it just also gives you a much more interesting way into discussing those issues because you're just seeing, and in my film, for instance, it's about a small scale traditional fisherman kind of coming up against modernization writ large. So that's issues related to um, EU fishing regulations,
Mm-hmm.
big fishing business, government sort of intervention in the market. So you have these big kind of newspaper headline things, but you're experiencing at the human level, at eye level, and I think it'll always be more interesting when you can kind of articulate it through an individual's experience. How does it make them feel? What is the effect on his family? And what I have to kind of imagine is, based on what we've talked, you might have a similar philosophy about these things. There's so much context in your.
Yeah, I feel like we're sort of in parallel kind of thinking or approach. I always feel like it's not my, first of all, in photography, you can't really tell the truth anyway about anybody or anything, and sort of like might as well play with this idea of imagination or collaborating with your subject. And ambition to make work for me is maybe can be more political, but then it ends up always being kind of like a very intimate look into somebody's life. But back to the question also, yeah, I've been thinking, for sure, like my latest project, to East Southeast, was definitely about sort of how you can talk about things that have passed and that have happened, the traumas that people, thinking about generational trauma as well. Like, I was thinking about like, how do you talk about gulag, when it happened, so long ago, but it still affects, really, it does affect everyday life in Estonia, and sort of psychology of people and how they carry themselves, and then thinking about what's happened to US and all the traumas this country has been through. And so most hard work is political, it should be, like, otherwise what's the point? Opposite of that, like, I don't know, I was grappling with this idea also, like how a lot of filmmaking or a lot of video based work and also some photography, like, is now dealing with social media and also reality television and things that are really kind of maybe vapid and empty, and like that kind of work gets to be celebrated. I feel like the people that will hit the road and like go to these faraway places and investigate and like do these kinds of deep dives into a world that we don't know much about, I feel a lot of those artists, like, it's sort of like you're like a dinosaur when you work that way. Like, now it's sort of about identity politics. It's about the artist, the psychology of the artist. And I'm kind of puzzled by that, because when I look around, I don't see like documentary filmmakers or photographers being like, it feels kind of old school to work in that way. Like, how do you feel?
In the ways that our mediums have become more democratic by virtue of digital and internet and so forth. It's an amazing innovation in our industries, and opening the pathway for a lot of new kind of voices. And at the same time, I think just it probably increases the signal to noise, or the noise to signal rather. So for me, good work still exists and is as good as ever. I think sometimes it becomes harder to find it as easily because the bar to entry is lower. So I think then there's also kind of an instinctive feeling in so many people is, we're touched by something, we're excited by something, we want to convert our inspiration into a product, we want to have a release. And sometimes there's, you can go from inspiration to production very quickly and it can be good, but at least my own experience so far has kind of taught me to believe that, sometimes those things just have to bake longer. And if you are able to take the patience and go deep, for me, that stuff just always as an audience, I always get far more out of that. And it all sounds, we're kind of talking very generally, but I kind of takes, I think, time to tell what's going to last. And I don't presume to be able to, or anyone to be able to really judge. But, sometimes you have a hunch, and sometimes you see a really great film and it knocks me on my feet. And it's just so clear that the storyteller, that they sweat and they embedded themselves in this world. And, you can just tell all that stuff ends up on the screen. Really, it's hard to lie.
Right. Yeah, I like that. There was a professor in grad school who always said, like, you'd rather make work that makes you go, at first makes you go, huh? And then you go, wow. Then if you go, wow, and then you're like, huh? Like, what is this really about? That it's better to kind of not go for the low hanging fruit and make work that sort of just tries to have like a shock value or something, but it's sort of more puzzling at first, and then you're like, holy shit, this is something, but yeah. Were there any other questions that you were kind of wondering about, or?
There's one about collectivity. It says, how has this pandemic caused you to think in terms of collectivity? How can one perhaps harness facets of isolation to one's advantage?
I do think there's something, I think I mentioned this before, that I just love how like my neighborhood really has come together, and just people, yeah, I think people are kind of more paying attention to each other. I feel like I felt more isolated before the pandemic in some ways, and now I feel a little bit more connected with my family and with my friends, even though I can't see them. But yeah, I've had some like really profound conversations, or I've actually, you know, I've asked like my grandmother about her like first love, or you know, just I had these conversations I always wanted to have, but it was never like good enough time because I was visiting for such a short amount of period. And so now it's, and yeah, and some friends too, you know, they've told me things that I had no idea about their life. You know, I have a friend who'd been through domestic violence and I had no idea, you know, and it just kind of came out. It was a while ago, but it just kind of came out, and I was like, oh my gosh, you know, and was really able to, or be there, you know, be there for her in a, like, even though it happened a while ago. So yeah, that is kind of the silver lining, the kind of togetherness that I didn't, or or maybe just reconnecting with people that where the relationship was maybe a bit more, not on the surface, but maybe there was no time to actually dig deep.
It also, you know, even just, you know, walking around the city, I like you, I kind of feel there's a bit more of a kindred spirit. And that's interesting because I felt that lacking in my own time in New York in comparison to other places. I always felt isolated. I feel like it's more isolating as a city, and it can be. Um, but also, you know, you walk around and it's this intangible thing of, you know, that everyone is going through kind of a version of the same thing, and we have so few sort of unifying, universal narratives together as a people, especially in a city as diverse as New York. You have all walks of life, people from all over the place, and it's what defines the city. But it's um, you know, it really seems in a kind of unfortunate way that in these times of some kind of tragedy, it's the easiest way to find these threads that can kind of bring people together. And you know, New York is kind of, in a way, sort of famous for sort of pulling together and having each other's backs. They have something in their inner life that I completely understand, and I guess that's kind of nice, to try to find silver linings, you know.
Yeah, yeah.